My name is Aaron Hale, and I am the fire lookout assigned to Black Ridge Tower. I arrived before sunset with a pack that felt heavier than it should have, the kind of weight that settles into your shoulders and stays there even after you shrug it off. The tower sits on a bald crown of granite, a square of steel legs, and a small cabin perched above a drop that turns the stomach if you lean too far over the railing. From up there, the forest doesn't look endless. It looks folded, layered into dark ribs and valleys that swallow sound. The wind was low and steady when I unlocked the door. Inside, the room smelled like dust warmed by old sun, oil from the stove, and something faintly sour that reminded me of wet paper. The windows wrapped the room, and each pane reflected my own shape until I felt multiplied. I set my radio on the desk, hung my jacket, and did the routine checks. Everything worked. Everything looked normal. That was the first lie the night told me. I noticed the logbook when I reached for the current season's binder. It wasn't where it should have been. Instead, there was a thick, weathered notebook pushed to the back of the shelf, its spine bowed and cracked. The cover was a dull, blistered brown, like it had been left too close to heat for too long. No label, no year, just a faint grease stain shaped like a thumbprint near the bottom edge. I told myself it was an old overflow log, something forgotten after a rotation. That happens. Towers collect debris the way shorelines collect driftwood. Still, when I lifted it, the weight surprised me. The pages inside were swollen, edges rippled, as if they had breathed in fog and never quite let it go. The first entry was neat, dated, ordinary. Wind direction, visibility, a distant lightning strike over the eastern ridge. The handwriting was careful, almost fussy. I flipped ahead. The next few pages followed the same pattern. Smoke checks, weather changes, notes about birds nesting under the eaves. A life reduced to watchfulness. Then the tone shifted, not in a way you can point to, but like the pressure change before a storm. The ink grew heavier. The sentences stretched. Observations turned sideways. One entry described the forest as holding its breath at dusk. Another mentioned a false reflection in the glass after midnight, blamed on fatigue. I felt a prickle between my shoulder blades and closed the book, listening. Night had settled while I read. The windows were black mirrors now, the forest pressed up against them like a held thought. The radio hissed softly. Somewhere below, something snapped, a clean sound, like a stick broken with purpose. I waited for it to repeat. Didn't. I opened the logbook again, telling myself I was just passing time. The handwriting changed further in. Different pressure, different slant. A different person, maybe, or the same person after something had worn them down. The entries stopped tracking fires and started tracking absence. Gaps in sound. Places where the wind should have been but wasn't. A line that read, "Smell of iron when the clouds sit low," underlined twice. I caught myself breathing shallowly. The cabin felt smaller, the ceiling closer. I adjusted the lantern and the light slid across the pages, picking up indentations where words had been pressed hard enough to scar the paper. The ink had bled in places, not from water, but from being gone over again and again, as if the writer didn't trust the first pass. Outside, the wind dropped to nothing. The silence that replaced it wasn't empty. It was dense, padded, the kind that makes your ears ring. I leaned toward the window and cracked it an inch. Cool air slipped in, carrying pine resin and the faint mineral smell of stone. Far off, an owl called once, then went quiet. The next entry wasn't dated. It began mid-thought. If someone finds this, check the glass before you check the sky. I felt a ridiculous urge to laugh and didn't. The reflection staring back at me was my own, pale and long, stretched by the pain. Nothing behind it moved. I checked another window, the same. I told myself to stop. I marked the time in the current log, made a circuit with my binoculars, scanned for smoke. The forest lay dark and unbroken. No glow, no drift. I could feel the tower's legs humming faintly through the soles of my boots, a low vibration from wind moving across steel. Back inside, the old logbook waited where I'd left it. The pages splayed like it had opened itself. That bothered me more than it should have. I pressed it shut and noticed something tucked into the back pocket. A loose sheet, folded small. The paper was thinner than the rest, almost translucent. When I unfolded it, the lantern light passed through, revealing smudged lines before my eyes could make sense of them. It was a map hand-drawn, not of the whole forest, just a slice. The tower marked with a careful square. Lines radiating out, not trails exactly, more like guesses. Some were scratched out. Others ended abruptly. In the margin, written small enough to be missed, were notes. Stops here. Sound carries wrong. Do not lean. My stomach tightened. I put the map back and sat down, forcing myself to breathe evenly. This was someone's bad night. That was all. People get strange when they're alone long enough. I knew that. I was alone now. The radio crackled, sharp enough to make me jump. Static. Then a burst of voice too garbled to understand. I reached for the handset and got nothing but hiss. The sound died as quickly as it came. The clock ticked. My pulse followed it for a few beats, then fell out of rhythm. I turned another page. The entries grew shorter, clipped. Heard my steps below. Light wrong at north window. Pressure in ears without wind. The last full page ended with a sentence that trailed off, the ink thinning until it vanished. Below it, pressed so hard it had torn the paper, was a single word written again and again until the page gave way. Wait. I closed the book. I stood. I walked to the window and put my hand against the glass. It was colder than the air, a chill that bit through skin. Somewhere in the forest, something moved, slow and careful, displacing leaves without breaking them. I told myself it was a deer. I told myself a lot of things as the night settled deeper around the tower and the unfinished book on the shelf seemed to breathe with the room. The clock said 21:40 when I forced myself to sit back down. I wrote the weather into the current log with deliberate care, letting the pen drag just enough to remind me of pressure and paper. Clear skies, no wind, visibility excellent. The words felt thin compared to the weight of the room. When I finished, the silence rushed back in, swelling until it pressed against my ears. I tried the radio again. A slow sweep across channels brought only static and the occasional click, like someone tapping glass far away. I kept my finger on the transmit button longer than necessary, then released it. The red light winked off. I imagined it taking something with it. The windows reflected the lantern's halo and my own movements. Every turn of my head produced another version of me, delayed by a fraction of a second. I angled the lantern lower, hoping to cut the glare. Outside, the forest held steady, a dark mass stitched with faint silver where rock faces caught moonlight. No wind stirred the treetops. The stillness felt intentional. I reached for the old logbook again, telling myself I would skim and put it away. The pages resisted, the paper fibers whispering as if reluctant to separate. The next entries weren't dated, but the times were marked in the margins, always late, always after the radio checks. The observations were meticulous, too meticulous. Crickets cease simultaneously. Smell shifts before sound. Stars appear fixed longer than expected. I paused and listened. There were no crickets. I hadn't noticed their absence until the page pointed it out. My throat tightened. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing, counting in my head. When I opened them, the words on the page seemed darker. The ink pooled where the lantern light hit it. A new sound threaded through the quiet. Not loud, not sudden. A soft scrape, repeating at irregular intervals, like boots on metal rungs, came from below. I stood without meaning to, chair legs rasping against the floor. The sound stopped immediately. The sudden lack of it was worse. I told myself it was the tower settling. Temperature changes do that. Steel expands and contracts. I knew this. I leaned over the trapdoor and listened. Nothing. I shut it and turned back to the windows, scanning the base of the tower with the lantern. The beam caught railing, bolts, the ladder disappearing into shadow. No movement, no shine of eyes. Back at the desk, the logbook lay open to a page with a pressed crease, like someone had folded it and smoothed it flat again. The entry was longer, the handwriting uneven. Found marks on stairs, not rust. Wiped away with sleeve. Returned after. I rubbed my own sleeve between my fingers, suddenly aware of how thin the fabric felt. The smell changed then, subtle but unmistakable. Iron and wet stone, like a riverbank after rain. Though the sky was clear and the ground far below, the pressure in my ears increased. A slow squeeze that made me swallow hard. I cracked the window wider. The air outside was colder, heavier. It didn't disperse the smell, carried it. I flipped ahead. The map appeared again, this time annotated further. New lines added in a different hand. Arrows pointing toward blank spaces between ridges. A note beside one arrow read, "Sound bends here." I thought of the scrape on the stairs and felt a flush creep up my neck. The lantern flickered, just once, enough to make my pulse jump. I adjusted the wick and steadied it. The light returned, but the shadows felt deeper for the interruption, corners sharpening as if newly cut. I set the lantern closer to the window, hoping to throw light outward. The glass reflected it back, doubling the flame. The radio crackled again, clearer this time. A voice slipped through the static, low and measured. It sounded like instructions being read aloud. I caught fragments. Hold and do not. Then the hiss swallowed it whole. I stood there with the handset in my hand, listening to the empty channel, waiting for the voice to return. Didn't. I wrote the time in the current log, my handwriting tight, 22:05. I noted the radio interference. I did not note the smell. I did not note the sound on the stairs. Writing them down felt like inviting them to stay. The forest below shifted, not visibly, but in the way presence shifts when you're not looking directly at it. A shape moved where the lantern light thinned, not stepping into the beam, not retreating either. The sensation of being watched pressed in, steady and patient. I lifted the binoculars and brought them to my eyes. The magnification pulled the trees closer, resolving bark and needles. Nothing moved. I lowered the binoculars and the feeling remained, anchored to a point just beyond the reach of light. I scanned again, slower. On the third pass, I saw something that made me lower them immediately. A reflection in the glass, not mine. A dark vertical line where the ladder should have been empty, the suggestion of a form occupying space without detail. I stepped back. The reflection vanished with the change in angle. I waited, heart hammering, then leaned forward again. Only my own face stared back, pale and strained. I returned to the logbook, drawn to it despite myself. The next page was torn out. The ragged edge caught on my thumb. In the margin of the page after, a note read, "Missing time between checks. Clock disagrees." I glanced at the clock. The second hand ticked. I watched it complete a full rotation, counting under my breath. 60 seconds. Normal. The relief was thin and fleeting. Another scrape sounded below, closer this time. Slower. I felt it through the floor before I heard it. A vibration traveling up the tower's legs. I moved to the center of the room and stood very still. The scrape paused. I could almost feel something listening back, matching my stillness. I whispered without intending to, my voice barely a breath. The sound fell flat, swallowed by the room. The pressure in my ears eased, just a little, as if in response. I didn't speak again. The last entry I read before closing the book for the second time was written in cramped lines. The ink uneven. If it reaches the landing, turn off the light. Do not look down. Wait for the sound to pass you. I stared at the sentence until the words blurred. The lantern burned steady beside me. Outside, the forest remained dark and whole. Below, the scrape resumed, deliberate now, ascending one rung at a time. I reached for the light and hesitated, caught between the instruction on the page and the certainty that darkness would make the room feel even smaller. The night pressed closer, and the tower seemed to lean into it, listening with me. The scrape paused just below the landing. I stood with my hand hovering inches from the lantern, feeling the heat against my knuckles. The room smelled sharper now, iron threaded with old wood and something stale, like paper left too long in a damp place. My ears rang, then settled into a dull pressure that made the space feel sealed. I waited. The logbook lay closed on the desk, its warped cover catching the light like skin. I could hear my own breathing and tried to slow it, afraid the sound would carry downward. When nothing happened, I told myself the pause meant retreat. I almost believed it. The ladder creaked, a careful sound, as if tested for weakness. A second scrape followed, then another. Each one climbed closer without urgency. I turned the lantern down, not off, just enough to shrink the halo of light. The shadows thickened along the walls, edges blurring until the cabin felt rounded, smaller than it had any right to be. I remembered the line in the book and forced myself to step away from the window. Do not look down. The thought repeated with a rhythm that matched the ladder's slow ascent. I closed my eyes, then opened them again, fixing on the floorboards, counting the knots in the wood. The radio crackled softly, not enough to form words. I ignored it. The scrape reached the landing and stopped. The silence after was absolute. I felt it on my teeth, a faint vibration, like pressure before altitude sickness sets in. I held my breath without realizing it and nearly laughed when my chest burned. A sound came from the trapdoor. Not a knock, not a push, a dry, sliding noise, as if something brushed across it and withdrew. The lantern flickered again. I twisted the wick lower, then lower still until the light was barely there. The room dimmed, and with it, the reflections faded. My face vanished from the glass. I stood in near darkness and listened. The pressure eased. The smell receded, leaving cold pine and dust. The relief was immediate and unsettling, like a reward given too quickly. I waited for the sound to pass me the way the entry said. I didn't know how to tell when it had. Minutes stretched. The clock ticked too loud. I reached up and stilled it with my fingers, wincing at the contact, then let go. The ticking resumed, steady and wrong. I glanced at the time and felt a jolt. It read earlier than it should have. I looked away, then back. The second hand moved, but the minute hand lagged, as if dragged. The radio cleared its throat. A voice slipped through, quiet and composed. It sounded close, as if spoken from just outside the door. "Hold," it said, or something like it. The word pressed against me. I did not answer. The transmission ended with a soft click that echoed too long. The trapdoor shifted, just enough to show a hairline of darker dark beneath it. I backed away until my calves hit the desk. The old logbook slid under my hand. I grabbed it without thinking, the cover warm, the pages alive with that whispering resistance. I opened it to a page marked with a crease I hadn't noticed before. The entry was brief. If it learns the room, leave the room. The ink was lighter, hurried. Below it, in a different hand, smaller, was an addition. Leaving does not mean going down. The ladder scraped again, but this time the sound was wrong. It came from above, a faint drag across the roof, metal against something softer. I tilted my head, fighting the instinct to look up. The pressure in my ears returned, stronger, and my vision narrowed. I thought of the windows, the way reflections could lie. I thought of the map and its arrows pointing to blank places. I thought of the instruction not to look down and wondered if up was any better. The lantern's flame guttered and went out, plunging the cabin into full dark. In the black, the forest felt closer. I could sense its shape, the way it rose and fell, the way sound bent and didn't come back the same. The smell of iron returned, heavier now. The trapdoor slid another inch. I felt air move, cold and damp, carrying that mineral tang. I took a step toward the door. The floor creaked in protest, loud as a shout. The sound on the roof paused. The trapdoor stopped moving. For a moment, everything held still, as if listening to the echo of my mistake. I moved again, slower. The door was a darker rectangle in the dark, a promise of space beyond the cabin. My hand found the handle, cold and slick. I remembered the note. Leaving does not mean going down. I pulled the door open and was hit by night air, thick and heavy. The forest exhaled at me. The scrape resumed above, closer to the edge now. I stepped onto the narrow platform, boots finding the boards by memory. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, heart racing. The tower hummed beneath my feet, a low vibration that traveled up my legs. I did not look down. I stared into the dark, letting my eyes adjust. The forest below was a single mass, no detail, no movement. The stars were sharp and fixed, too fixed. I became aware of a sound moving along the roofline, not scraping now, but gliding, like fabric pulled taut. The logbook was still in my hand. I flipped it open by touch and found a page by the indentation alone. My fingers traced the pressed words. Do not follow sound. Follow absence. I swallowed and listened. There was a place where the forest was quieter than the rest. Not silent, but thinned, as if something had been removed. I turned toward it without thinking, my body responding before my mind caught up. The platform boards ended in that direction, a short step away. The sound above me slowed, then stopped. The pressure in my ears eased again, the way it had when the light went out. I took one careful step toward the quieter dark, trusting the absence over the noise behind me. The tower creaked softly, like it was settling. I waited, balanced between the door and the edge, listening for the sound to pass. The quieter dark did not welcome me. It didn't resist either. It simply existed, a pocket of reduced sound where the forest's usual texture felt thinned, as if someone had rubbed a thumb across the night and smudged it. I stood there, 1 foot closer to the edge than the other, arms slightly out from my sides for balance, listening with my whole body. Behind me, something shifted its weight on the roof. Not enough to scrape, just enough to be known. The tower answered with a low, sympathetic groan that traveled up through the boards and into my knees. I froze, afraid even the movement of breath would tip the balance. The absence held. I focused on it the way you focus on a distant light when you're dizzy. The smell was different there. Less iron, more cold stone and sap. The pressure in my ears eased another notch, like altitude loss after a long descent. I took that as permission and slid my second foot forward until both boots were aligned with the edge of the platform. I did not look down. I kept my eyes level with the horizon, where the forest and sky blended into a single dark band. The stars above it were wrong, too sharp, too still. I remembered an entry about stars appearing fixed longer than expected and felt a thin thread of understanding tug at me. Not enough to explain anything, just enough to tighten my chest. The sound above me resumed, slower now, pacing the roofline. Each movement felt deliberate, measured to my stillness. I imagined it learning the dimensions of the cabin, the placement of weight, the way the tower responded. The logbook had warned me, if it learns the room, leave the room. I had left the room. I was not sure I had left what mattered. My hand tightened around the book. The cover was damp now, or maybe my palm was. I flipped a few pages by feel, letting the paper whisper. The sound from above paused again, as if listening to that small noise. I stopped turning pages and waited. The absence did not collapse. That felt important. A gust of wind brushed my face, the first real movement of air all night. It came from the quieter dark, lifting the hair at my temples, carrying the clean scent of pine needles crushed underfoot. It did not touch the rest of the platform. It felt localized, intentional. I leaned into it a fraction. The tower protested with a soft creak, but nothing shifted above me. Encouraged, I shifted my weight another inch. The platform edge pressed against my boot soles, a solid reminder of where I was. I did not step off. I did not need to. The absence seemed to meet me halfway. The radio inside the cabin crackled once, sharp and loud in the open air. I flinched despite myself. A voice burst through, clearer than before, pitched to carry. It sounded like instructions read aloud, the cadence calm and practiced. I caught more this time. Stay and return. And something that might have been my name, bent by static. I turned my head toward the door and stopped. The absence thinned when I did, like fog disturbed by a hand. I faced forward again and the quiet returned, denser. The radio fell silent. The sound on the roof shifted toward the side opposite me, tracing the edge of metal with a faint, almost curious glide. I imagined it peering over, testing angles, learning how far it could lean without being seen. The thought made my skin prickle. I pressed my back against the door, feeling the cool metal through my jacket. Time behaved strangely there. The clock inside ticked, but the sound reached me delayed, stretched, as if traveling through something viscous. I counted the beats and lost track halfway through. My legs began to tremble from holding tension too long. I flexed my toes inside my boots, grounding myself in the simple fact of pressure and balance. Another breeze came, stronger this time. It carried a new smell, faint but unmistakable. Old paper. The same sour note I had noticed when I first opened the logbook. I looked down at it despite myself and felt a jolt of disorientation. The cover looked darker, the edges more swollen, like it had absorbed moisture from the night. I flipped it open and the pages fell to a place on their own. The entry there was not one I remembered reading. The handwriting was cramped, urgent. The edge holds if you don't look for the bottom. Below it, added later, was a line pressed so hard it had embossed the page. It will try to give you your voice back. The radio crackled again, softer, coaxing. The voice that followed sounded closer than it should have, as if standing just inside the door. It used my cadence this time, my pauses, my careful control. It said my name clearly. The sound above me stilled completely. My mouth went dry. I did not answer. I focused on the absence, on the place where sound failed to return. The breeze lifted again, pushing gently at my shoulders, encouraging without force. I leaned into it another fraction, heart pounding, trusting the book more than the voice. The tower shuddered once, a deep vibration that traveled through the legs and into the rock below. Dust sifted from somewhere above, catching faint starlight before vanishing. The sound on the roof resumed, faster now, agitated, circling. I felt the urge to look up, claw at me, and ignored it, eyes fixed on the blurred horizon. My boot soles edged closer to nothing. The absence felt wider now, less like a pocket and more like a corridor. The pressure in my ears dropped suddenly, making me gasp. The sound above faltered, then shifted away from me, retreating toward the far side of the roof. I took a careful step sideways, along the platform, keeping the edge at my toes. The absence moved with me, sliding like a shadow cast by something I couldn't see. The breeze strengthened, steady and directional. I followed it, one measured step at a time, the door now a dark shape at my back. Inside the cabin, something thumped once, hard enough to rattle glass. I felt it through the door. The radio burst into static, then cut off entirely. The sound above me skidded, metal shrieking briefly before catching. I flinched but did not turn. The platform ended ahead, the railing cutting off the path. The absence pooled there, thicker, deeper. The breeze pressed against my chest, urging. I placed one hand on the railing, feeling the cold bite of it, and shifted my weight until my heels lifted slightly. I did not look down. I listened to the absence and let it tell me where to stand as the night tightened around the tower and the sound behind me struggled to keep up. The railing vibrated under my hand, a faint tremor that traveled into my wrist and settled there like a held note. I tightened my grip and leaned just enough to feel the breeze press harder against my chest. It wasn't strong. It didn't shove. It suggested. The absence pooled beyond the railing, deeper than before, a quiet that felt structured, almost shaped. Behind me, the door rattled once, then again, the sound muted by distance even though it was inches away. Something moved inside the cabin, heavy enough to make the tower answer with a low groan. I imagined it learning the hinge, the latch, the way the door flexed when pressed. The thought made my scalp prickle. I kept my eyes forward. The stars remained fixed, too sharp to be comforting. The forest below was a single, unreadable mass. I focused on my breathing, matching it to the rhythm of the breeze. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled. The absence seemed to widen when I did that, like a path opening because I'd learned how to step. The radio inside crackled again, faint through the metal and wood. A voice followed, quieter now, almost conversational. It sounded like it was explaining something reasonable, like it wanted me to understand. I felt the pull of it, a familiar cadence, the promise of clarity. My jaw tightened. I did not turn. The logbook slipped in my damp grip and thumped softly against the railing. The sound cut through the night sharper than I expected. Everything paused. The breeze faltered. The pressure in my ears ticked up, a warning squeeze. I caught the book before it could fall and held it close to my chest, willing myself to be still. After a moment, the absence returned, thicker than before, as if forgiving the noise. I exhaled and eased my weight back into the direction it indicated. The railing pressed into my palms. The metal felt colder, as if it had been waiting. I slid sideways another inch, then another, moving along the railing toward where the platform narrowed. The absence moved with me, always just ahead, never collapsing. The sound above the roof resumed, not pacing now, but hovering near the edge, its movement hesitant, uncertain. I sensed frustration in it, though I didn't know why that made sense. The breeze shifted, angling downward, then out. It brushed my cheek, then my ear, carrying the clean smell of pine and cold stone again. I followed it, careful, deliberate, until my hip brushed the corner post. The platform ended there. Beyond it was nothing solid. I paused, muscles screaming with tension. The door behind me thudded once more, harder this time, rattling the latch. The sound on the roof skidded, metal shrieking briefly before stopping. I felt the vibration through the post, up my arm, into my teeth. The absence deepened. It felt less like a lack and more like a channel, a place sound slid into and didn't return from. I remembered the line in the book about following absence, not sound, and let that memory anchor me. I lifted one foot and tested the space beyond the platform edge with the toe of my boot. There was nothing to meet it. My stomach dropped reflexively and I pulled back, heart pounding. The absence did not retreat. It waited. The voice from the radio changed tone. It sounded disappointed now. Said my name again. Slower, careful with the syllables. It told me to come back inside, to sit down, to write this out properly. The idea of the desk, the lantern, the familiar ritual of logging the night tugged at me. I swallowed hard and shook my head once, small and firm. The breeze strengthened, pressing more insistently. The pressure in my ears eased in response like a reward. I understood then, not in words but in sensation, that the absence was not asking me to step off. It was asking me to align. I adjusted my stance, turning my body slightly so my shoulders faced the quieter dark. The railing dug into my forearms as I leaned into it, trusting the balance. The sound above me stilled completely. The door behind me went quiet. For a long moment, nothing happened. The night held its breath. I listened to the absence and felt it listen back, a mutual attention that steadied me. My legs trembled, but the shaking slowed as I matched the breeze's rhythm. Then the tower shifted. Not a collapse, not a violent jolt, a subtle reorientation like a boat adjusting to a current. The vibration traveled through the post and into the railing, changing pitch. The absence widened suddenly, stretching outward and downward. The pressure in my ears dropped sharply and I gasped, a sound that vanished into the quiet without echo. I felt lighter, not weightless, just less anchored to the tower. The realization scared me enough to snap my focus back to the physical. I tightened my grip, dug my boots against the boards, and stayed where I was. The absence did not punish the hesitation. It held. Inside the cabin, something scraped hard across the floor, a sound full of irritation. The radio burst into static, then cut dead. Above me, metal groaned as whatever was on the roof shifted away from the edge, retreating toward the center. The breeze brushed my back now, gentle, guiding. I followed it sideways, inch by inch, tracing the edge with my body while keeping my eyes fixed on the blurred horizon. The absence moved with me, a corridor that curved subtly around the tower. When I reached the far side, the absence pooled again, deeper than anywhere else. The air there felt cooler, denser. The smell of old paper returned, faint but persistent. I looked down at the logbook and felt a jolt as the cover flexed in my hands, as if responding to the place. I opened it without thinking. The pages fell to another unfamiliar entry. "There is a way the tower forgets you," it read. "It is not straight down." Below it, in smaller writing, was a note that made my chest tighten. "The forest remembers, but it does not keep." A heavy impact shook the door behind me, rattling the hinges violently. I flinched, grip tightening on the railing. The sound on the roof rushed back toward the edge, fast now, careless. The tower vibrated with the movement, metal protesting. The absence deepened, pulling at my balance like a tide. I leaned into it, trusting the sensation over the noise. The breeze strengthened, steady and directional, pressing at my shoulders and hips, aligning me with the quiet. I lifted one foot and set it down where the absence felt most complete, not off the edge, but along it, finding a narrow line of balance I couldn't see. My weight shifted. The tower creaked, then settled. The sound above faltered again. I took another careful step, guided by pressure and lack rather than sight, moving along a path that existed only because the night allowed it. Behind me, The door slammed open with a metallic crack, the sound exploding outward and then dying abruptly, swallowed by the absence. I did not turn to look. I listened to the quiet ahead and followed it as the tower shuddered behind me, struggling to remember where I was. The path along the edge wasn't visible. It announced itself through pressure and relief, a narrow band where the night felt less hostile to my weight. I moved slowly, testing each shift with my hips before committing my boots. The railing ended behind me. Ahead, there was nothing solid to touch. The absence held steady, as if insisting I keep my hands to myself. The door behind me slammed again, harder, the impact ringing through the tower's frame. The sound burst outward and then vanished, cut cleanly as if someone had closed a valve on it. I felt the vibration ripple under my feet and pass without returning. The absence accepted it. That mattered. The breeze pressed at my shoulders, angled now, guiding me along a curve I couldn't see. It carried the clean smell again, pine, stone, and beneath it the sour paper note that seemed tied to the book. I clutched the logbook tighter, using its weight as a counterbalance. The cover flexed, warm and damp, like it had absorbed more than air. Above me, metal shrieked briefly, a panicked scrape as whatever had been on the roof lost purchase. The sound skidded, caught, then retreated toward the center again. I imagined it recalculating, trying to follow the corridor I was on and failing to find purchase in it. The thought steadied me. Time continued to misbehave. The stars still hadn't moved. The clock inside ticked, but its rhythm arrived stretched, inconsistent. I stopped counting. Counting belonged to the tower. The absence widened slightly, enough for me to straighten a fraction. My calves burned from holding tension. I breathed out slowly and felt the pressure in my ears ease in response. The night rewarded compliance. I didn't know if that was kindness or conditioning. I advanced another careful step. My boot landed on nothing solid and yet did not fall. The sensation was wrong in a way my body protested immediately. My stomach lurched. I froze, heart hammering, muscles locking to keep balance. The absence firmed beneath me not as support, but as permission. I shifted my weight minutely until the pressure felt even again. The radio crackled from inside the cabin, louder now, as if compensating for distance. The voice returned, calm and practiced, told me I was making a mistake, told me there was a safer way, told me the wind was lying. The cadence was persuasive, built to carry authority without urgency. It used the same pauses I did when I wanted someone to listen. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat and reopened them, fixing on the blurred horizon. The absence thinned when I thought about the voice, thickened when I ignored it. I chose thick. The book shifted in my hands, pages whispering. I opened it by touch again, flipping until the paper fell to a place on its own. The entry there was short. Do not argue. Movement teaches. Beneath it, in a different hand, was a single line pressed deep. Stillness invites imitation. I moved. Another step, guided by pressure and the faint, directional push of air. The absence curved downward slightly, not off the edge, but around it, like a ramp made of nothing. My boot followed the curve and found balance. The sensation was dizzying, like walking on a slope you can't see. The tower groaned behind me, a drawn-out complaint that ended abruptly. The door banged once more, then fell silent. I imagined the cabin emptying itself of sound, the way lungs empty of air. The thought made my throat tighten. The sound above the roof resumed, frantic now, pacing fast, careless. Metal rang as it struck the edge, then recoiled. Could not find the path. The frustration in it felt sharp enough to taste. The breeze strengthened, steady and directional, pushing at my back and hips. The absence widened again, enough to let me take 2 small steps in succession. My confidence rose and fell with each breath. I did not rush. Rushing belonged to sound. The smell changed as I moved, iron fading, stone and sap dominating. The sour paper note lingered, tied to the book, to me. I wondered if it was a marker. The thought flickered and passed. Analysis thinned the absence. I reached a point where the curve leveled out. The pressure in my ears normalized completely for the first time all night. The relief was so sudden it made me sway. I compensated, arms out slightly, and steadied. The absence held. The radio inside the cabin burst into static and then went dead. Not a click. A hard stop. I felt something settle when it did, like a door closing far away. The stars finally moved. Just a fraction, but enough to notice. The change sent a ripple of unease through me, followed by a strange gratitude. Time was resuming, or at least pretending to. I took another step. The path narrowed. The absence compressed into a thin line that demanded precision. I slowed, placing my boot carefully, letting the breeze correct my angle. The sensation was intimate, invasive, like being adjusted by unseen hands. I accepted it without naming it. Behind me, the tower vibrated as something slammed against the inside wall. Glass rattled. I felt the shock through the air. Then nothing. The absence swallowed it whole. The path did not collapse. I was aware then of a second quiet, deeper than the absence I'd been following. It lay ahead, not directional like the breeze, but settled, like a basin. The air there felt heavier, cooler. The pressure in my ears dipped again, gently this time. The book tugged in my hands. I looked down despite myself and felt a jolt as the cover bowed outward, as if something inside pressed back. I opened it and found another unfamiliar entry. "There is a place the sound cannot cross," it read. "You will know it because your name will not fit there." I whispered my name under my breath without thinking. The sound fell away immediately, clipped, incomplete, like it had been cut from a recording. My chest tightened. I tried again, louder. The absence thinned in response, warning me. I stopped. The breeze angled downward again, toward the deeper quiet. I followed, one careful step at a time, trusting the pressure and the lack over everything else. My legs trembled, but the shaking was controlled now, purposeful. The sound on the roof reached a peak, metal screaming as it scraped along the edge, then abruptly ceased. The sudden silence that followed was not absence. It was vacancy, a clean removal. I felt it pass over me like a shadow. I stepped into the deeper quiet. The absence changed character there. It wasn't a corridor anymore. It was a room without walls, a volume where sound entered and didn't return. The breeze softened, becoming a steady presence rather than a push. I stood within it and felt the night adjust around me, like a lens refocusing. Behind me, the tower shuddered once, a final complaint, then went still. I did not turn to look. I listened to the quiet ahead and stayed aligned with it, holding the book close as the forest and the tower negotiated what they would remember of me. The deeper quiet did not echo. It absorbed. When I shifted my weight, the movement registered only inside my body, not in the air. My breath felt private again, contained. I inhaled slowly and let it out, testing the space. The sound thinned and vanished before it could reach anything else. I felt my shoulders loosen for the first time since stepping outside. The breeze settled into a steady presence, no longer guiding so much as accompanying. It brushed my sleeves and the back of my neck, cool and dry, carrying the clean scent of stone and pine. The sour note of paper lingered faintly, bound to the book I held. I adjusted my grip and felt the cover flex, as if the pages inside had shifted position on their own. Behind me, something struck the tower's interior wall again. The impact was heavy enough that I felt it through my boots, but the sound itself arrived blunted, stripped of urgency. The deeper quiet took it and smoothed the edges. I realized then that distance here wasn't measured in steps or height. It was measured in how much the night allowed to return to you. I did not move right away. Stillness felt correct in this place. The logbook's pages whispered once, then went still, like they had settled into alignment. I held it against my chest and listened for the voice from the radio, half expecting it to intrude even here. Didn't. My name remained unspoken. The stars above had shifted again, just enough to reassure me that time was still pretending to function. Their light seemed dimmer here, filtered, as if passing through layers before reaching my eyes. The forest below was no longer a single mess. I could make out contours now, gentle slopes and darker pockets, the suggestion of depth returning without the pull of vertigo. The absence I'd followed thinned further, dissolving into this broader quiet. I took a tentative step forward and felt resistance. Not solid, not obstructive, just a subtle suggestion to slow down. I complied. The pressure in my ears remained even. My heartbeat steadied. The sound on the roof resumed, faint and distant, as if happening far away despite the tower's proximity. Metal scraped once, then stopped. I sensed uncertainty in it now, a lack of confidence that made it smaller. Could not cross into this space. The book had been right. I opened the logbook again, the motion instinctive. The pages fell to a new place, paper cool against my fingers. The entry there was written in a careful hand, steadier than the frantic notes near the end. The quiet widens if you let it. It read, "Do not rush it. Do not name it." Beneath that, in lighter ink, was a single sentence that made my throat tighten. "When it forgets you, do not remind it." I closed the book and pressed it flat against my chest, committing the words to memory without repeating them. The urge to check the tower, to see what was happening behind me, rose sharply and then eased as I let it pass. Curiosity belonged to sound. I stayed with the quiet. I took another step, then another, moving slowly into the deeper basin of stillness. Each movement felt acknowledged but not recorded, like walking across water that refused to ripple. The breeze softened further, becoming ambient rather than directional. I no longer felt pushed. I felt held. The smell of iron was gone completely. In its place was damp earth and old needles, the honest scent of forest floor after a long day without rain. The sour paper note faded too, until the book smelled only of age and dust. I loosened my grip slightly and felt the cover relax under my palms. Behind me, the tower emitted a long, low groan, a sound of strain rather than anger. It vibrated once, then again, the frequency changing as if something inside it shifted position. I felt a distant sympathy for it, a structure designed to watch and record now struggling to reconcile what it could not log. The radio burst into static one last time, faint and distorted, like it was broadcasting from underwater. The voice tried again, weaker now, its cadence off. It said my name, but the sound fell apart before the syllables could settle. The deeper quiet rejected it without effort. The transmission ended not with a click, but with a soft unraveling. I realized then that my own thoughts sounded different here. They were quieter, less insistent, the edges blurred. The impulse to narrate, to frame what was happening, faded. I let it. Framing was another way of naming. I stepped forward and felt the space open, not downward, not outward, but inward, like a widening circle centered on me. The sensation was disorienting and calming at once. My balance adjusted automatically. The ground, or whatever stood in for it here, felt consistent underfoot. The sound from the roof stopped entirely. Not paused, ended. The tower's vibrations smoothed out, settling into a neutral hum that faded as I moved farther away from it. I sensed a boundary pass over me, subtle as a change in light. On the other side of it, the tower felt less immediate, less relevant. I glanced down at my hands and felt a moment of disquiet. They looked normal, but less defined at the edges, as if the night hadn't finished deciding where I ended. I flexed my fingers slowly. The movement registered without resistance. The quiet accepted it. I thought of the entries about missing time and clocks disagreeing. I thought of the instruction not to remind the forest. The thoughts slid through without catching. I did not hold on to them. Ahead, the deeper quiet stretched on, featureless and calm. I sensed that if I kept moving at this pace, the night would continue to make room for me. Not indefinitely, just enough. Behind me, something inside the tower slammed hard enough that a distant clatter echoed, thin and distant, stripped of urgency. The sound reached me weakened and then dissolved. I did not turn. I followed the quiet forward, step by measured step, letting the night adjust its memory around my movement, trusting that what it chose to forget would be enough. The deeper quiet stretched without landmarks. It wasn't empty. It was complete in a way that made edges unnecessary. I moved through it at the same measured pace, careful not to hurry, careful not to linger. Each step felt acknowledged and then released like a thought allowed to pass without being held. The sensation of ground underfoot was consistent but vague, more agreement than surface. I tested it once, pressing down harder with my heel. The pressure answered evenly. I didn't test it again. Testing belonged to doubt. The breeze faded into something like ambient air, present but not directive. My ears remained comfortable, the pressure balanced. The relief was quiet and persistent. I realized how much effort I'd been spending just tolerating sensation before, how loud my body had been. Here it settled. The smell of forest floor deepened. Damp earth, old needles, a hint of rot that spoke of time rather than decay. Felt honest. The iron note was gone completely. The book against my chest no longer tugged or flexed. It lay still, heavy and inert, like an object that had finished its work. Behind me, the tower existed only as a thinning presence. I could still sense it if I reached for the thought, but the effort felt unnecessary. The deeper quiet didn't reward looking back. It didn't punish it either. It simply didn't respond. I became aware of a subtle change in light. Not brightness, texture. The darkness ahead softened, losing the hard contrast it had held near the tower. Shapes suggested themselves gently, tree trunks, the slope of ground, the suggestion of distance. None of it pulled at me. None of it invited interpretation. I walked on. My breathing synced naturally with my steps. Inhale for 2, exhale for 2. I didn't choose the rhythm. It arrived fully formed. The night seemed to prefer it. The thought that this was conditioning surfaced briefly and slid away without friction. At some point, the sound of my own movement began to return. Not fully, not sharply, but as a private sensation rather than an audible event. My boots brushed something softer. Leaves, needles. The contact registered in my legs, not my ears. The deeper quiet allowed it. I slowed further, letting my steps become deliberate placements. The ground sloped gently downward now. Not a drop, just a gradual easing. My balance adjusted without effort. The night made room. The book shifted against my chest. I stopped. The pages whispered once, then fell still again. I considered opening it and felt the absence thicken slightly, a polite discouragement. I did not open it. A memory surfaced without warning. The first entry I'd read, neat and ordinary, wind direction and visibility. The thought arrived complete and then thinned, its edges dissolving before it could settle. I understood then that memory here was allowed, but not accumulation. Holding on to too much would give the quiet something to press against. I let the memory go. The stars above were fewer now, or maybe just less relevant. Their light filtered down in a diffuse way, as if the air itself had decided how much to pass through. Time felt present but uncounted. I no longer had the sense of moving forward within it. I was moving with it. A sound reached me then, faint and distant. Not the scrape, not the radio, something lower, broader. Wind through a wide stand of trees, maybe, or water far off. The sound entered the quiet and was changed by it, softened, spread thin. It did not pull me toward it. It did not warn me away. I adjusted my direction slightly, following the ease rather than the sound itself. The deeper quiet accepted the adjustment without comment. My name occurred to me and dissolved before I could shape it internally. The sensation was strange and not unpleasant, like releasing tension I hadn't known I was holding. The line from the book surfaced, "Your name will not fit there," and passed on without snagging. The forest began to feel more present, not as a watching mass, but as layered space. Depth returned without threat. I could sense distance without measuring it. The absence I'd followed no longer felt like a separate thing. It had diffused into the environment, becoming a property of place rather than a guide. I walked until walking no longer felt like progress. I stopped when stopping felt appropriate. The deeper quiet did not change in response. It held steady. I became aware then of a faint pressure behind me, not at my back, but somewhere further away, like the echo of intention. The tower, perhaps, or whatever had learned the room and failed to learn the edge. The pressure did not advance. It hovered at the boundary I had crossed and could not follow. The book warmed slightly against my chest, then cooled. I understood without explanation that it no longer needed to be held. I lowered it carefully and placed it on the ground at my feet. The cover settled without a sound. The pages did not whisper. For a moment, the deeper quiet tightened, as if noting the change. Then it relaxed. The book remained where it was, an object again, no longer a conduit. I felt lighter without it, less defined. I took one step away from it and paused. No pull followed. I took another. The quiet widened. Behind me, far away now, a sound collapsed inward. Not a crash, not a scream, a failure of structure, maybe. The deeper quiet absorbed it completely. Nothing returned. I did not turn. The forest ahead opened further, not in space but in permission. I sensed that if I continued, the quiet would continue to accommodate me, not indefinitely, but without resistance. The idea of an endpoint felt misplaced. This was not a path. It was a condition. I moved on, step by careful step, letting the night decide how much of me it would keep and how much it would let go, trusting that the balance it chose would be survivable. The deeper quiet began to thin without warning, not collapsing, just easing, the way pressure equalizes after a long descent. I noticed it first in my breath. The air felt a fraction cooler, a fraction heavier. My steps registered more fully, a soft return of sensation that belonged to ground and gravity rather than permission. I slowed and listened. The forest did not rush back all at once. It returned in layers. The faint brush of leaves under my boots gained a whisper of sound. The space around me accepted it and let it travel a short distance before taking it away again. The balance felt deliberate, negotiated. I stopped walking. The night held steady. When I exhaled, I heard it. Not loud, not echoing. A private sound that still belonged to the world. My chest loosened with the realization. The deeper quiet hadn't abandoned me. It had stepped back. Light changed again subtly. The darkness ahead gained texture. enough to suggest trunks and low brush without demanding attention. The stars thinned further, their sharpness softened into something more diffuse. Time felt present now in a way it hadn't before, not counted, but acknowledged. I stood there and let the place decide what came next. The pressure behind me, distant, hesitant, shifted. I sensed movement at the boundary I'd crossed earlier, a testing that did not advance. Whatever had learned the room and failed to learn the edge did not try to follow me here. The deeper quiet held its line. A memory surfaced without resistance. The smell of the cabin when I first unlocked the door, dust and oil and old sun. The thought arrived clean and complete and stayed. That felt important. Memory was allowed again, selectively, without accumulation. I turned my head slowly, carefully, and looked back. There was no tower in sight, not hidden by trees, not swallowed by fog, simply not present. The slope behind me was forested and unremarkable, the kind of terrain you could walk without thinking about it. The absence where the tower should have been did not register as a whole. It felt like a decision already made. I waited for vertigo. It didn't come. I took a step back the way I'd come, testing. The ground answered normally. Leaves shifted. A sound returned to me, faint but real. The deeper quiet did not resist the movement, but it did not expand to accommodate it either. The boundary held. I stepped forward again and felt the difference immediately. The quiet deepened just enough to be noticeable, a gentle encouragement rather than a pull. I understood then that crossing back was possible but not supported. The forest would not stop me. It would simply stop helping. I stayed where I was. The air carried new smells now, sap, damp bark, something faintly sweet and decomposing. Honest forest smells. My shoulders dropped another notch. The tension that had been living there felt old, unnecessary. I became aware of sound further out, not near, not pressing. Water, maybe, or wind moving through a wide stand of trees. The sound traveled and returned changed but intact. I listened without following it. My hands felt lighter without the book. I flexed my fingers and watched the motion, grounding myself in it. The edges of my hands looked normal again, defined. The night had finished deciding that part. A thought came, uninvited but clear, daylight. Not as an escape, not as relief, as a transition. The idea settled and stayed without demanding action. I did not check the sky. Time moved. I felt it this time, a slow progression marked by subtle shifts in temperature and light. The deeper quiet receded another fraction, leaving a broad calm in its place. The forest accepted more sound, more presence, without reclaiming urgency. Far away, something collapsed inward again, softer than before, like a structure settling after strain. The sound arrived thin and distant and then disappeared completely. I felt no need to interpret it. I took a few careful steps forward. The ground sloped gently upward now, a return to effort without difficulty. My legs welcomed the work. Each step left a trace of sensation that faded naturally instead of clinging. The boundary moved with me, always behind, always intact. I did not test it again. At some point, I realized I was cold. Not dangerously so, just enough to notice. I adjusted my jacket and continued on, letting the movement warm me. The forest responded with small, honest sounds, branches shifting, leaves brushing. Nothing coordinated, nothing attentive. I thought of the logbook where I'd left it, resting on ground that might not remember it. The thought passed without regret. The book had done what it could. The rest was not for it. Light gathered ahead, not brightness, just a thinning of dark. The suggestion of dawn arrived without ceremony. Birds did not sing. The forest did not announce the change. Simply allowed it. I stopped at the edge of a shallow clearing and stood there as the night eased its hold. The deeper quiet had fully withdrawn now, leaving a calm that felt earned rather than given. I breathed and heard it. I moved and felt it answer. Behind me, nothing called my name. I waited until the light was enough to see where I placed my feet, until the ground felt entirely itself again. When I finally turned and chose a direction, it was not guided by absence or sound. It was guided by ease. I walked on, carrying what the night had chosen to leave with me, and leaving the rest where it would not be asked to follow.